What can thousands of images tell you about protest and resistance across the world?
I looked up the definition of archive once, and someone had this interesting definition of it, that it's a secretion of an organism. And I thought, oh, that's a fabulous way to think about it, because it is really organic and idiosyncratic in that it's specific to the person who keeps the archive.
Welcome to Conversations from the Collection, a Newcastle Art Gallery podcast. I'm your host, Sana Kobayashi. For the past 15 years, Brisbane and Los Angeles-based artist Jemima Wyman has collected online images of protests to use within her intricate hand-cut photographic collages. Jemima's practice examines patterns and masking, particularly the way camouflage is used as a strategy within resistance movements. Her collage works can often be made up of thousands of individual images, assembled together to create beguiling, almost psychedelic works. And what is particularly interesting is the way that Jemima preserves these global acts of protest by extensively documenting where and when each image was captured. These dates and locations are then reflected through her artwork titles, and her longest title is over 13,000 words long. Jemima joined us online from Los Angeles on the lands of the Tongva and Chumash peoples, and we started our conversation speaking about her upbringing in regional towns across North and Far North Queensland and the impact this had on her early development as an artist.
I call it psychedelic regionalism in that both my parents are hippies, and we moved to Dysart, which is a coal mining town in Queensland. And yeah, my mum has an amazing creative energy. So she's always making all the time and still is to this day. Like, she'll go on holidays and just be making things. And it's kind of just very seamless with her life. Like, she came to visit me in LA and like whipped up 6 dresses for me and made curtains for our entire house and did her own watercolors and collaging. And so she's just always doing things creatively as a part of her life. When we lived in Mackay, our kitchen was decoupaged, all the cupboards and the pantry and everything with amazing images from magazines and different things. And as she likes to say, we're not talky talk, we're makey make. So that's how we communicate and, you know, express ourselves and connect and collaborate in a way. So they're all kind of formative experiences in my creative life in regional Queensland.
And were you making alongside your mum at home? Were you, sort of...
Oh, yes. I always say she's my first collaborator. Yeah, we were making, the dining room table was never used for eating on. It was always just full of things to make things with. You could always, anywhere in the house, you could reach out and grab a pair of scissors and some tape and something and make something.
That's amazing.
And it was great because you could work on a creative project and know that it was there, it would be there the next day. You know, it wasn't moved around. So you could kind of build on works.
And so where did the idea of becoming a professional artist enter your life?
Well, I was always making, and then I think it became apparent in high school. I won the Minister's Art Awards, where you get selected to be in an exhibition and you show your art in Mackay. And then I was one of the selected people who got to travel to Brisbane to do a series of workshops over a week. And we actually had our work shown at the Queensland Art Gallery as a part of the award. Wow. And so when I received that award and went down for the week to Brisbane, I was socialising with the other art students, and they were reading Marxist theory and surrealist poetry, and they had punk hairdos. And I actually had one of the punks like cut my hair, and I was like, oh, these are my people. Like, this is who I'm meant to be with. So I was like 17 when I moved to Brisbane in 1995. I didn't know how to catch public transport. I didn't know how to hail a bus. No one told me how to do it. No one told me you had to press the button to get off the bus. So basic things like that people living in a city take for granted, I didn't know. But having said that, the art school was amazing. I was at QUT, the Queensland University of Technology, and there were people doing experimental performance. People had rats as pets in the 90s as well that they would wear to art school. So it was like, I guess, a political awakening in terms of my understanding of art and contemporary art and my own subjectivity and how I wanted to orientate myself in the world. But I don't think I had an enlarged perspective on the political climate of protest, and having that become a part of the work. So it didn't happen till much later, until the end of my master's in 2007.
And that was at Cal Arts, is that right?
Yeah, California Institute of the Arts, yeah.
And so how did you end up there?
So I ended up at Cal Arts through winning a Sam Stagg scholarship, actually. So I had a friend who had also won the Sam Stagg and had gone to Cal Arts. And so he had told me about the amazing teachers and the program there. So I was so fortunate to win the Sam Stagg, but it took me 3 tries and 7 years to get the Sam Stagg to go there. So it was like a long-term plan.
Yes.
And I started the master's in 2005.
It's a good reminder for people to just keep applying,
Yeah, and it can change your life as well. So it's worth the try and the effort, and not taking the rejection personally. I think that's the biggest thing that everyone kind of has to remind themselves, that being rejected for awards or grants is something you shouldn't take personally, and you should kind of always keep applying, because it's different groups of people that assess those things and can tune into your practice in different ways, for sure.
Why were you drawn to the US, or was it LA in particular that you were interested in going to?
Well, I think growing up in North Queensland, I was used to a lot of sunshine. So it was the climate. Like, I needed to be somewhere where I would get my vitamin D. I guess I had done research into like the feminist legacy of Cal Arts. And then also I was interested in trying to do more performance. And the emphasis there is not on making in a high volume way. They don't actually even expect you to make very much. It's very focused on conversation. So one of the classes was a 12-hour critique, where you would sit in a room with a group of 20 people, and the class would start at 10 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
And sometimes it would finish at 1 a.m. and you would have a couple of 30-minute breaks in there, but you were expected to be in the room and be there for a conversation. And sometimes you would talk about one artwork for 6 hours. So
wow, phenomenal.
Yeah. It was an incredible experience, because it means it was like a marathon of art talking, in that you could see what artworks warrant a conversation and what artworks don't warrant a conversation. And it's amazing to sit with art for that long and try and think about it and experience it in a deep way. And, I'll never have that experience again.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you could speak about your identity as a palawa woman who also has English heritage. And I was wondering if you find that your cultural identity informs your work and the way that you approach your practice.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think it affects my practice in a kind of subconscious or like subliminal way. I don't deal with the content around being a palawa woman explicitly in the work, but I think it comes up in terms of my understanding of identity. And if I was to generalize the core themes that have run throughout it over the last 20 years, it would really be about a phenomenological understanding of the body and trying to locate my body in space and locate my body in relation to other people and a collective identity. And so I do this in a really basic way throughout the practice in different like iterations. So I'm often making like imaginary communities or collective bodies with pattern fabric or clothing, or I'm trying to, bring bodies together across different countries and different spaces. Also, there's kind of like a theme of like nomadicness in the work too, where I think that comes up because I'm living between two countries. So I think I kind of always come back to the ideas around, seeing and being and trying to locate myself in space in different ways.
I would love to dive into some of the collage works. Are all of your collage works hand cut?
They are, yes. I never make digital collages. So, it's kind of actually a fairly meditative process because I'm using both hands to hold the photo and to cut the photo. They involve hundreds and hundreds of individual pieces and sometimes thousands.
I saw that monumental commission that you recently developed for Quag Goma, which was a huge plume of smoke made up of different smoke from protests around the world. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think when you were talking about that work, you said it was over 2,400 individually cut pieces that you'd pulled together.
Yeah, and the title is 13,000 words long. Oh. So each individual piece of smoke is chronicled in the title so that you know what protest, the date, and the country that it's from. The title is organised in terms of the colour of the smoke and then chronologically starting from the earliest piece to the latest piece. But usually the events are events that have happened in the last probably 10 years. Those collages become like a map or an atlas of dissent or protest. So it's kind of like a visual mapping of current kind of conflict in the world.
That's amazing. And you've been compiling that image archive, I think, is that from 2008? Is that right?
Yeah, so it started in 2008 after I finished my master's degree in Los Angeles, and I was wondering where in the world were masks being used as a device to protect the wearer while also giving them a platform to be able to have a voice and speak in the world. And so I was interested in shifting my work from using my own body as a performative body and seeing where other people were kind of performing in a public way, but where the stakes are much higher. And so I started looking at the Zapatistas, which is a liberation army based in Chiapas in Mexico. And then the archive developed from there, and I started to then look at where masking was being used to protest Scientology by the anonymous hacktivist group. And they were using the Guy Fawkes mask, and then that Guy Fawkes mask was then being used in the Occupy protests. And it kind of just kept going. Like I don't think I ever thought I would continue working with masking and protest for such a long time, but the world changed and the global protest movement just kind of snowballed, and there were so many interesting ideas and ways that protesters were cloaking their body and covering their body with pattern fabric or with masks or with scarves or using visual devices for tactical frivolity and also to have power to speak at the same time, and power in their bodies to go up against government or go up against institutions that were oppressing them. So,
can you talk a little bit to that term, tactical frivolity? What do you mean when you use that term?
Yeah, tactical frivolity is a term used by different protest groups, and it's basically where you can use theatrical devices or masking or clothing to perform in the space of protest, and that it would give you power, to use humour. So there's a specific group called the Clown Army, and they're based in the UK, and they dress up as clowns and also wear camouflage, and they'll go up against the police and kind of perform in a clowning kind of way. But it's a device used to get media attention, but also to shift the dynamic out of a straight kind of violent conflict too, I think. So it's like a device that can diffuse the tensions while still allowing protesters to get their message across.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think frivolity can be very powerful, tool to use in those spaces. I wanted to touch on, you've got a meticulous referencing system to retain all the sources for the images that you collect. I was wondering if you could let us peek a little bit inside to that system. How do you keep track of everything?
It's very organic, and it's developed organically too. So I have this archive that started in 2008. It consists of over 5,000 images. It's developed over the years, and depending on what I'm making collages about, it will develop in that direction. However, every image in the archive relates to protest and protective coverings. So whether that be masks, balaclavas, bandanas, and then more recently it's where smoke is used, whether it's coloured flares, to make a protest movement look bigger, like the yellow vests movement. They were using yellow flares to take up more space and to also signal that they're protesting. And that's how I started with an interest in smoke as a covering and as a form of camouflage. So the archive focuses on, you could summarize it and say it focuses on camouflage in protest in a really broad sense of the word of camouflage.
Yeah.
So the archive exists as a digital archive on a hard drive, and then it also exists as piles and piles of photographs in boxes in my studio. So at the moment I have one whole table that's designated to all of the different rounds of smoke in the archive, and that I'm pulling from to make collages currently.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a very idiosyncratic archive. And I looked up the definition of archive once, and someone had this interesting definition of it, that it's a secretion of an organism. And I thought, that's a fabulous way to think about it, because it is really organic and idiosyncratic in that it's specific to the person who keeps the archive. So in a way, it kind of can tell you something about the person who owns the archive.
Absolutely. This is your secretion.
Yeah, it is. All of my artwork is.
You're now a lecturer yourself, and I was wondering how that work sits alongside your practice.
Yeah, over the years I've taught all different age groups. Now I mainly teach at university. I'm really interested in how generous art making and art viewing and art being is as a process. So the thing I love about teaching is that, art offers this way of connecting people. It's like a triangulation. It's not you and one other person having a conversation. It's you and the artwork and another person. And you can kind of connect and understand each other's psychology and ways of being in the world through the artwork.
Yeah.
And so I love that dynamic, because I think it gives you a different way of connecting with people that isn't confrontational, but it also permits a deeper understanding and a deeper connection with people in terms of teasing out what it means to be in the world. But my favorite thing with teaching is doing critique. I think that's kind of my favorite medium and favorite thing to do, where it's teaching, deep kind of looking and thinking about work, and then how you can then use that as an artist to make work.
Yeah, it's an important part of artistic practice, I think, to engage in those deeper ideas.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much information there is in an image, or there is in work. And so you can really spend a lot of time digging in there and making observations and training. It's really training yourself to have that skill. It's a practice. So it's great to exercise that in the teaching environment. And it's great because you're developing a collective conversation with a group and a collective consciousness about looking and being in the world, which I love.
I also love that you frame it as generous. You know, I think sometimes...
Oh, it's so generous.
Yeah, I think sometimes people think about critique as like that it can be hard or scathing, but I love the framing of it as a generous act that's shared, you know, a shared understanding between people. I think that's a really beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah, I think sometimes because the word critique sounds like it is about coming in and being critical and denigrating work or like work, you know, using work against people or against ideas. But I guess the way that I teach it, it's really about you know, helping an artist understand what's in there and teasing that out through language and through ideas.
Jemima, I just wanted to dive back into some of the themes that are within your work, particularly the duality of anonymity and visibility that's embedded within protest aesthetics. And you've really been exploring this for more than 2 decades now. Can you talk a little bit more about what you find so interesting about this dichotomy?
Yeah, it's so unusual because I guess it's, you know, the practice tells me things a lot of the time. And so, yeah, like I said earlier, I'm surprised that I've been working so long with protest culture and masking and camouflage, but it's just such rich territory. I mean, the way that I originally found myself working with it was I was performing with my own body and dragging my own femininity and subjectivity. And actually it was in a critique where someone said to me that they thought that the work was not feminist and that I was just objectifying the female body again through my work, which I wasn't. I disagree with. However, that comment was amazing in that it made me think really long and hard about, well, how can I be in a body that desires to be looked at without reiterating the objectification of the female body? And so that train of thought led me to think about, well, where in the world do people use pattern fabric and masking so that they can have a voice, be looked at, have a platform to speak and be heard, but do it in an anonymous way where they're not being objectified. So that's really where the shift occurred in my practice between using my own body and exploring subjectivity in a phenomenological way to looking at where in the world is, you know, this type of body and subjectivity represented, which it's a porous body that's about collective identity and collective needs, and needs a voice, like it's a matter of life and death. And so that's why the practice really shifted to looking at where it happens in real life, where the stakes are higher. And yeah, I was really interested in that because it's not in a space of theatricality or a philosophical space. It's in the space of the real, like it's in our real world. So, I mean, there's another conversation to be had around also pattern and decoration and camouflage.
Oh, please, let's dive into that around, yes.
That's another subtext in the work is in my work, I want to disprove this idea that pattern and decoration and fabric is pathologized as passive and domestic. I think it's actually a very strategic form of warfare. So that's why in my work I look at camouflage, because camouflage is pattern and it is fabric and it is a weapon and it is warfare. So there is this other subtext in my work thinking about the ideology of textiles and pattern and how it's been pathologized in art history. And so in a way working with the Liberation Army content and the protesters and how they use pattern and fabric in the work is also an argument that goes into that, thinking about, ideological textiles.
I had not really thought about pattern and fabric in that context as a weapon before. Yeah, it's really interesting way to shift the way that you Yeah, look at material, I guess. You would think that material is...
Yeah. And that's why there's different works within my practice that deal with a specific palette or a specific pattern or a specific mask, because it's trying to highlight what that visual system is and why it's important and why it's being used, because it's to do with opticality, and it's a strategic visual device that's being chosen for survival or to stand out or to blend in.
This might be a good time to touch on your work in Newcastle Art Gallery's collection. Mass Monument, Yellow and Black, was made in 2018, and it's a really great example of your use of collage. In this work, you'll find individual elements of masked, costumed or disguised protesters holding signs, releasing flares, unified by a shared yellow palette. I was wondering if you could talk about how you begin making a work like this.
Yes, so that working with the yellow and black kind of developed, there was a number of synchronicities happening at that point in time where I was looking through the archive and seeing a lot of yellow and black. There was yellow and black being used in Hong Kong by the umbrella movement. The yellow vests in France were protesting. They were writing with black Sharpie on their yellow vests. Black Lives Matter internationally were using yellow and black as a part of their movement. There were the yellow shirts in Malaysia. They were anti-government protesters. And so I was like, oh, what's with all this yellow and black? And so I wanted to kind of think about it further, and in a way that collage that Newcastle has in the collection is really important, because that was the first time that I pulled all the yellow and black protesters together to start to see what was happening and what it meant. And through doing that collage, I started to connect the dots and think about, well, where in the world is yellow and black also used? And, road signs use yellow and black to warn of a hazard ahead. In the animal world, there's a camouflage called aposematism, which is yellow, black, and white, and sometimes it's red, black, and white. But the high contrast mean that it stands out and it warns of toxicity and warns of danger of head to a predator. So it's saying to a bird, don't eat me, I'm going to be toxic and kill you.
Yes.
And so I was like, wow, all of the protesters are choosing this schema of yellow and black because it's a warning of what's ahead. And so that became really fascinating to me. And that work, the aggregate icon that Newcastle has, then was kind of like the seed that started to grow into a whole solo exhibition at Sullivan and Strumpf in Sydney called Like a Siren, It Repeats. And so it generated a whole body of work about what's, yellow and black as a warning of what's ahead.
When you see those kinds of patterns popping up around the world, do you think that they're conscious decisions that protest groups are making, or do you see it as an unconscious?
Like a collective unconscious?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex dynamic. I can speak to how the work develops for me in the studio, and it's really about looking and slowly connecting the dots, and then the more conscious you become of the pattern, then the more you see the pattern, and then you realize the pattern is happening elsewhere. And so I think with protesters using those devices, it is a combination of good graphic design decisions and then group decisions, like the symbolic of the color for the movement. So I think it's really complicated. I think there is some unconsciousness to it, but then there are some really strategic decisions being made as well.
And having spent 20 decades looking at all of these images from protests across the world, what is your relationship to protests now? Is it one of, optimism, or does it make your heart heavy to look at these images?
It's complicated because it depends on what the images are and what the work is. Definitely I've been working with the smoke the smoke collages for the longest period now. Like I've been making them since 2018. So that's 5 years of working with really similar forms of camouflage. And depending on the world events are heavier in the collages and in the smoke, whereas, there's periods where it feels different.
Yes.
And often in the smoke works, when it's colourful smoke, it's to do with, flares that are protesting like women's rights and different things. And so that feels like about hope and like pushing for human rights in a really positive way.
Yes.
But sometimes in the smoke, it's tear gas or burning tires. Also, a lot of the time, protesters are dressing up as superheroes and like the Simpsons or Pikachu, like in that collage that Newcastle has.
Yes.
That's all in there.
There is a little Pikachu in there.
Yeah, they're trying to be someone or something else of a higher power. Like you can think about it in a spiritual way, but you can also think about it in a kind of like fantasy superhero way too, where it's like, oh, I need that extra power to go out there and be in the world and speak my truth. And so, yeah, it is really complicated. So it just depends on, what I'm doing in the practice and also what types of protest and protesters I'm looking at. The heaviness of the heart shifts.
Yes.
Yeah, depending.
Do you take any of the images yourself?
I think I've taken one out of the thousands and thousands. It's really, for me, it's really about the online space and kind of having this different view of the world and being able to pull images from that. It's really like a kind of mapping project and an observational project rather than being an active photographer in the world. I feel like it's more about sorting and seeing and making the connections and making the patterns obvious in different ways and in an idiosyncratic way so that people can approach the news and current affairs with a different perspective and a different vision of the world.
Now, I wanted to touch on collaboration because I understand that's also a really strong part of your practice. Your performance collaboration, CamLab, with fellow artist Anna Mayer, has been going on for 17 years now. Can you tell us a little bit about these collaborative works?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so CamLab started in 2005 in our first year of the master's program. So we were just developing a friendship, and then through humour and our mutual interest in feminism and optical patterns and the work of Bridget Riley, we just organically started collaborating and then never looked back, and we're still collaborating. So it was a really beautiful thing. It's kind of like a friendship, that unexpectedly develops, and it's a really important friendship and a really important collaboration to us both. But yeah, the main focus of the collaboration is thinking about what it is for two women to come together as friends and make work about a collaborative subjectivity as opposed to kind of the historical figure of the male genius. So it's really about critiquing that patriarchal history to do with art history and seeing, how our voices together could counter that. And it's based in humour and friendship and our mutual pleasure, and using the everyday and micro experiences as examples to make artwork from. So, yeah.
And what has collaboration allowed you to explore that your solo practice hasn't?
Yeah, I think in the collaborative practice, we're able to take liberties that we can't in our individual practice, in that it gives us confidence to talk about difficult issues, specifically difficult issues related to things that happen in women's lives. I think the premise is that if there's two of us making the work together, it means that we've had a conversation and we're self-conscious of the subject matter as well. So that means that that's already acknowledged by the viewer when they come across the work. So when we're working with humour or like being silly with parts of our own female bodies. It's like we can take risks and be more playful. And it's probably something we wouldn't do in our individual practices, but we will do together because we have the support of each other. Sometimes it's kind of like we've had ideas when it's kind of like sleepover vibes together that we've actually been like, oh, that's really funny, or that's really interesting. We should make a work about that. And then we actually make the work. And then we're like, wow, like it just came from this really safe, playful sleepover space. And then it developed into a whole thing, which
That's so beautiful.
Which is sometimes interesting and sometimes embarrassing.
Well, we have come to the end and we've reached our final question, which we've been asking all of our collection artists. And that is, if you could have dinner with any artist from Newcastle Art Gallery's collection, who would it be?
I would like to have dinner with Emily Kama-Nwari.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful choice. Why did you select Emily?
I think because I saw an exhibition of hers at Queensland Art Gallery in the mid-90s, and it was an amazing exhibition of just hundreds of her paintings. And I remember reading about the work, and she talks about pattern and the gesture of mark making and how it happens across the body and across on sand and in song and on canvas. And so I would love to have time to talk to her about her thoughts on pattern and mark making across community and across culture and across the land and across the body and across the canvas. And of course, she's been so prolific and made so many works also about that process and the interconnectedness of pattern, I guess, in a spiritual way, but also in a practical way too, in terms of marking community and so I have a lot of things I'd like to talk to her about.
What would your ideal dinner be? What would you be having for dinner with Emily?
Oh, I wouldn't even be worried about the food. I'm pretty open to everything and anything. I would be super into sitting next to her and chatting, and maybe after the meal we could make some work together side by side. I would love some parallel making time with her.
Stunning. Well, as you were saying, you're makey, not talky, but you have done an incredible job speaking with us today, and it has been such a pleasure to listen to you speak about your practice. It's really opened it up for me, and I've enjoyed myself immensely. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Conversations from the Collection. If you'd like to know more about Jemima and her work in Newcastle Art Gallery's collection, there's a link in the show notes, or you can visit the gallery website at nag.org.au. Join us next week as we meet with painter and sculptor Lindy Lee.
The thing about art is, a really good piece of art, is that it will move you. It will cause a question or a resonance inside of you. And the mark of a good work is the way it carries on inside of you even after you've left that work.
Conversations from the Collection is a Newcastle Art Gallery production, and we pay our deepest respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast was produced. This project is supported by the New South Wales Government through Create New South Wales. And if you enjoyed listening, please like, subscribe, and share us with your friends.